Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a civilization that fundamentally changed what it means to be human. We're talking about ancient Egypt over 4,000 years ago, achieving engineering miracles that even our modern technology kind of struggles to fully comprehend. But as you'll see, behind all those awe-inspiring monuments and the gold-drenched artifacts, there is a totally fascinating, honestly pretty dark contradiction. Their absolute greatest achievements weren't just buildings, they were desperate, all-consuming attempts to cheat the inevitable. Which brings us right to the central question we're answering today. How exactly did a civilization destroy itself in an attempt to defeat death? This isn't just a dusty story about ancient architecture, guys. This is a full-blown psychological thriller. We're going to dive into the devastating societal cost of this total obsession with the afterlife and how the very quest to defeat mortality ultimately triggered the collapse of one of the greatest empires in human history. All right, Section 1, Nile River and Civilization. So before any of these grand structures even existed, early humans were basically just running. They were surviving day to day as hunter-gatherers, battling the elements and just trying to stay alive. But then, a really crucial shift happened. They actually stopped running from nature and started observing it. They noticed the sun rises in the same direction, that the seasons return like clockwork, and this new understanding, it led them right to the banks of the Nile River. The Nile was literally a lifeline. Its predictable annual floods left behind soil that was basically as precious as gold. For the very first time, humans realized, hey, we don't have to keep moving. They could settle down, plant crops, and actually wait for a harvest. And right there is the fundamental friction of early civilization. Because it wasn't just about growing food anymore. As population started booming around the Nile, the competition for land and water seriously intensified. Small groups naturally began to clash. To survive being so crowded together, they realized they needed rules, they needed order, and most importantly, they needed unified leadership to settle all these land disputes and hold everyone together without falling into chaos.
Moving on to Section 2, Pharaoh and Fear of Death.
The psychological grip this new leader had on his people was absolutely total. The pharaoh didn't just conquer lands, he conquered hearts and minds. He positioned himself as a literal, living god on earth. To the common people, this was the guy who commanded the Nile to flood and the crops to grow. His word was undeniable law. You didn't just question the pharaoh, because doing that was like questioning the universe itself. His existence meant their actual survival.
But here is the absolutely crucial, terrifying paradox of this whole system. The pharaoh had infinite power in life, sure, but he shared the exact same vulnerability as the absolute poorest laborer working the fields: mortality. And this sparked a deep psychological terror among the elite. Think about it. If the living bridge to the gods dies, does the whole world just plunge into darkness? To cope with this, they developed a really desperate foundational belief. They convinced themselves that death wasn't the end at all. It was just a journey to a new beginning.
Which leads us to Section 3, Mystery of Mummy and Pyramids. Let's dive right into the fascinating, slightly gross, microscopic details of how they actually tried to pull this off. If the soul was going to make this epic journey to the afterlife, it needed a pristine, perfect vessel to return to. Enter mummification. And no, this wasn't just some quick ritual. It was an intense, weeks-long scientific process. Step 1, carefully remove the internal organs because they knew those decayed the fastest. Step 2, they literally packed the body in a special salt to completely drain it of moisture. Imagine curing a human body the way you'd preserve meat. It is mind-blowing early science. And finally, Step 3, they wrapped it up in endless layers of linen, packing it tight with herbs and perfumes. It was the staggering blend of chemistry, biology, and just profound faith. But perfectly preserving the physical body? Yeah, that wasn't enough. They had to preserve the pharaoh's lavish lifestyle too. And this fueled an insatiable hubris. Rulers were buried with unthinkable wealth. We are talking mountains of gold, exquisite jewelry, vast supplies of food, and, shockingly, even servants. The mindset was crystal clear. The pharaoh's absolute power and total comfort must continue uninterrupted for all eternity. And to house all this eternal power, they built the pyramids. It is truly, absolutely unbelievable what they accomplished here with our wheels or iron tools. The ground was perfectly leveled. Tens of thousands of laborers dragged impossibly heavy stones from quarries located incredibly far away. And these massive stones, they were cut and fitted with such intense precision that you literally cannot slide a single piece of paper between them. Plus, using their deep knowledge of astronomy, they aligned these massive structures perfectly with the 4 cardinal directions. It was basically a giant message to the cosmos that the pharaoh ruled over time itself. Okay, but we have to hit pause right here and ask a really critical question. In this grand obsession with eternity, did they completely forget about the present? The pyramids were built by thousands of laborers who at first truly believed they were fulfilling a divine duty. But as the pharaoh's ambition grew, the heavy burden on the living began to crush them. So let's look at Section 4, Changing Balance of Power.
You see, this obsession began to severely drain the empire's resources, and it literally started tearing their society apart at the seams. On one side, you've got the pharaohs and the high priests. Their temples are hoarding just massive amounts of wealth, and the elite's focus is 100% on building even grander tombs for the afterlife. But then on the other side, you've got the common laborers. They are being crushed under endless taxes and are completely exhausted by this back-breaking, never-ending construction. The sheer cost of these eternal resting places was bankrupting the living. And quietly, behind closed doors, the common people began to really question this entire divine system.
Now, to manage this increasingly strained, complex society, their administration had to evolve, and that led to the rise of hieroglyphics. While they are incredibly beautiful to look at, this picture writing system was actually a highly practical tool. It was developed to record history, yes, but mostly to track incredibly complex tax systems and manage dwindling resources. But here's the catch. As administration grew, power quietly shifted. The pharaoh couldn't just rule alone anymore. He had to rely on this massive network of literate priests and officials who, surprise, surprise, began accumulating their own immense power and influence. Section 5, The Beginning of the Fall. We've reached the climax of our explainer. The delicate balance of power was broken, the treasury was drained, and the stage was set for a spectacular collapse. And it wasn't just one thing that brought them down. It was a total perfect storm, an avalanche of interconnected threats. Internally, those exhausted laborers finally started rebelling against the crushing taxes. Politically, the wealthy priests began openly rivaling the pharaoh's authority. Externally, neighboring tribes saw all that wealth and the growing internal weakness, and they started launching invasions. And as if that wasn't enough, nature itself turned against them. The once reliable Nile floods became irregular, which caused absolutely devastating famines. Basically, they were crumbling from the inside out and the outside in. This created a deeply tragic irony. Think about it. The pharaoh, the guy who was supposed to be a living god, the master of the universe who ruled over time itself, was suddenly forced to step down from the heavens. He had to pick up weapons and become a gritty frontline warrior just to defend the crumbling borders of his very mortal empire. The wealth that was supposed to build eternal monuments to the gods was suddenly being poured into a desperate military defense. And guys, the cultural toll was immediate and visible. The endless wars completely drained whatever was left of the treasury. Suddenly, that mind-blowing perfectionism that defined early Egypt, it vanished. You can see it in the historical record. There's a sharp, noticeable decline in the quality of their art, their architecture, and even their hieroglyphs. The glorious, perfect stone carvings were replaced by rushed construction, marking a tragic loss of their former cultural glory.
And finally, Section 6, True Legacy of Immortality.
So the empire eventually fell. It was broken by its own hubris, internal fractures, and those endless wars. But as we wrap up, we really have to look at what they actually achieved after the dust settled. The source material we're covering today ends with this incredibly powerful thought. Empires fall, but stories do not. Power may end, but legacy never dies. The political state of ancient Egypt absolutely collapsed under the heavy weight of its own ambition. But their sheer, stubborn defiance of time, that remained.
Which leaves us with this final, profound question to really think about. Just like modern figures obsess with anti-aging and their own legacies, the ancient Egyptians pushed themselves to the absolute breaking point just to be remembered. Yes, their society was destroyed by the sheer cost of building these tombs. But, considering the pyramids still stand over 4,000 years later and their mummies still rest in museums across the entire world, did they actually succeed in defeating death? Their empire died, yes, for sure, but their quest to be remembered forever? That was an absolute, undeniable triumph. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you look at the incredible legacy left behind in the sands of time.